Hello and welcome back to the channel. Heatblur was kind enough to give me a preview license key for the F-4 Phantom for DCS World in order to review it and to create some of my own particular brand of content. They specifically asked that I be honest with my review and set no expectations on what sort of content I was going to make. Now I know it might be frustrating to many of you to see content creators get a first crack at the module when you've waited so long for it to finally be here. Please keep in mind that we're also acting as final beta testers, reporting bugs as we find them, and Heatblur has pushed out multiple new builds per day to us to make sure that the product that is going to take up valuable space on your hard drive is worth the money that both you and I have paid. In this video, I'm going to discuss some of my first thoughts and impressions of the module after only having it for about a week. Enjoy. This is it, the legend itself. The F-4 Phantom 2 by Heatblur Simulations is an incredibly authentic recreation of the all-weather jet interceptor and fighter bomber from the 1960s. And when you look at its resume, it's hard to know where to start. Maybe that it was the original Joint Strike Fighter, serving with distinction among the 3 fixed-wing operators of the United States military. Or that it went on to serve as a superbly successful export fighter with 10 of our allies and 1 foe. It has shot down over 300 adversaries, the second highest tally among jet fighters next to the F-86 Sabre. It's big, it's ungainly, and it answers the question, if you put enough power on a brick, can it fly? In DCS, we rarely get to see all the intricate parts of the aircraft we're flying. Most of the time, we're heads down in a cockpit or seeing an amalgamation of pixels in the vague shape of a bandit sweep by our canopy. That's not to say we're okay with this, but when we stop and take a moment to look around at what the artists have created, it's hard not to be awestruck by what they've accomplished. The detail in the F-4 is nothing like anything I've ever seen. Everywhere I look, I'm finding more details that blur the lines between the digital world and reality. You're not going to find a repeated texture or a mirrored surface on this module. Every stencil, hundreds of them, have been painstakingly placed on their respective panels. Hydraulic lines are properly routed and when parked, removed before flight streamers blow gently in the wind. I dare any rivet counter to go up against this model and tell them it's wrong. And all of these details, meaningless on their own, begin to add up to something genuinely special. When you spawn in a cold cockpit, you actually feel as if you've just walked across the ramp and climbed into your jet. By clicking on the helmet resting on the canopy rail next to you and put it on, it also removes the covers on the exterior of the jet, as well as tells the crew chief to stow the ladder. Is this absolutely necessary? Not at all, but I find it to be a very cool, immersive touch that got me into the mindset that I was about to go flying. And the immersion doesn't stop there. Looking around the cockpit, you find details that we've come to expect from the artists at Heatblur. Many people would be worried that all of this detail would be at the cost of performance. But even here, on a busy ramp, my frame rates were sitting around 60 frames per second on an RTX 2080 Ti. Heatblur has incorporated the startup procedure with a virtual crew chief by using the gesture control wheel. It's a nice touch, and in some ways more intuitive than the DCS radio menu that we're used to, and definitely easier to read. That being said, there are some issues with using the wheel and the replay system, particularly in multiplayer playbacks. As we taxi out, it was pointed out by some of the subject matter experts that the canopies were almost always open on the ground, from startup out to the runway and after landing all the way back to the ramp. Why, you might ask? Because it's cool. And who wouldn't want to listen to that intake? The flight model of the F-4 is incredibly well detailed, as you'd expect. While I've never flown an F-4 in real life, there's an authenticity in the feel of the module. There's a depth to each of the control inputs that feels unique to any other module in DCS. Under normal circumstances, the jet feels very stable and is one of the easiest modules to fly formation in. However, once you start getting into the more aggressive maneuvering, it'll reward smooth control inputs and punish stick snatchers. One of the areas that Heatblur is replicated well are the adverse yaw characteristics of the F-4 in high angles of attack, where the rudder becomes your primary control surface in place of the ailerons. So it's time to get your feet off the floor and to start dancing again. I'm also excited to use some of the new weapons and capabilities that the F-4 offers, including the addition of the Walleye and GBU-8 electro-optically guided bombs, the bespoke pave spike targeting pod, as well as the CBU-1 and 2 canisters that we first got on the A4 mod but have been refined for the inclusion on the Phantom. It's no secret that I'm a huge fan of this era of aircraft. Unlike modern fighters, which seemingly can do every task that's asked of them without hesitation, these older jets are full of compromise and limitations due to the technology of the day. For me, it's about the challenge, to chase that perfect bomb drop or the thrill of a dogfight between another player in an equally challenging airframe. I've never felt more home in a DCS module than when I initially started using the F-4, a comment I passed along to the developers on day one. The system's knowledge I learned from the A4 transferred over easily, and you can see a lot of the DNA and best practices passed along here. And while the scooter will always hold a special place in my heart, I think it's going to be parked for a while. The F4 is really that good, and is a natural successor. While I'm not going to sit here and tell anyone what to do with their money, I personally see hours of entertainment potential in the Phantom, and am exceedingly glad I pre-ordered it. It joins an ever-increasing number of aircraft from that part of the Cold War which I enjoy the most, where the mettle of a pilot wasn't based on how well they can look at a screen, but how precisely they could master their aircraft. I hope you enjoyed this first look at the F-4 Phantom 2, and if so, please take the time to give it a like and a comment down below for the algorithm. I'd like to thank Heatblur for giving me the opportunity to take an early look at this module, and believe me when I say, you're not going to be disappointed. That's all I have for you on this one, so fly good, don't suck, and I'll see you next time.